Just as we've had concern with the U.S. of the flow of people coming from the south to the north. So we have shared interests in here in making it something that is manageable and controlled, and those that are not authorized to cross the border are promptly returned pursuant to the safe third country agreements.
Canadian leaders are panicking over President-elect Donald Trump's threat of 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods coming into the States unless our government gets control of the flow of people and drugs crossing illegally into the United States of America. And that response you just watched from Mark Miller perfectly encapsulates the response. Raw shock, gasping for air, deer in the headlights. Friends, it's time to batten down the hatches because I have a feeling that we're in for a very bumpy ride. I'm Rachel Parker, and this is Rachel and the Republic. Hey everyone, welcome back to Rachel and the Republic. I'm your host, Rachel Parker. We are going to be joined by fan favorite and True North columnist Sue-Ann Levy today. Sue-Ann, thank you once again for being here. I feel like we should honestly just make you a co-host at this point.
That would be lovely.
Take some of the pressure off me. So Sue-Ann, you are down in Florida now. We were texting over the weekend. You were driving down from Ontario, escaping the cold weather as so many Ontarians do. My grandparents, I know, will be joining you down in Florida in a few weeks here. They usually go after Christmas, before New Year's type thing. So tell me, you're in the States. What's the mood like down there?
Well, it's interesting. My wife and I went out for Chinese food the other night, and we could hear people talking about the election. There's a real buzz about it. But, the people that we know that have come to our home to help out with various and sundry things are all Trump supporters, and they're ecstatic. Now, we're also friends with people from the East, shall we say, New York and Illinois, and they're still holding their pity parties because, of course, the world is going to explode. But as I drove down, and I talked to a lot of people who would not go on camera, unfortunately, but as I drove down, the world didn't explode. We crossed the border from Georgia into Florida, the free state of Florida. Nobody turned us back because we were gay or because we were women. We're here and we're queer and we're, carrying on with our lives.
So you mentioned that some of your friends in the East seem to be holding a bit of a pity party. Speaking of people who seem to be holding pity parties, Kamala Harris decided to release a video, I guess maybe encouraging or rallying supporters. She is in rough shape. Take a look at this clip.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Okay, wow. Wow, Sue-Ann. Everyone who saw this clip online was saying basically the same thing. What has happened to Kamala Harris? Looks like she's aged 10 years in like a week. I have a feeling she's been on a bit of a pity party bender. I don't know, the stress of this seems to really have gotten to her. What do you think is going on here? She appears intoxicated in the video, and it looks like she hasn't slept in about a week.
Yeah, she looked really, really rough. I actually saw the video on Fox News, and they kept playing it and replaying it, and, oh god, she should have never, ever gone on air in that kind of condition. But then, of course, she ran half of the campaign in that condition, so why should we be surprised? But, yeah, she does look like she's aged. She looks like Hawaii was not good to her. She claims to have been on the phone with a lot of supporters and that her life will go on and that she's coming back and she's either going to be running for governor of California, which would suit her just fine, or going for another presidential bid, which I just nearly choked on my dinner when I heard that last night.
Yikes. Yeah, definitely don't think another presidential bid is in the books for her. I doubt that she would win. I don't actually even doubt it. I feel fairly confident that she wouldn't win a Democratic primary. And, the chances of her getting slipped in as a last candidate, like happened when Joe Biden suddenly and suspiciously resigned, is nearly impossible. It was really kind of a once in a lifetime thing we witnessed in this election cycle. I heard reports that essentially she had wanted to do this off the cuff video. Her staff said, they didn't think it was a good idea, but she insisted. And, that's how this video came to be. And I saw people, even, Kamala supporters, basically saying, like, you guys really need to take this down. Someone in her office should have had the courage to say no to her. But I suspect the people around her haven't had courage to be honest with her or give her the truth for a long, long time, given a number of the mistakes that she made in the campaign, and even just given the fact that she, was really not well suited to the role of a Republican or of a Democratic presidential candidate. I don't think she was really up to the chops for that job. So don't think we'll be seeing her again. Governor of California. I mean, even that, it feels like how does it feel to go from, usually people they build their way up, and then once they're president, like, then you take a step back, then you're done with politics. At least in, the short time that I've been covering politics, that seems pretty standard. I'm even thinking here in Canada, Stephen Harper, after he was prime minister, he wasn't like, "Oh, I'm gonna go and run for an MP." Jason Kenney stepped aside. Rona Ambrose, after she was the interim Conservative leader, she stepped away shortly afterwards. So it seems like a little bit of a backwards thing here, but she's still quite young when we consider how old American politicians typically are. And, she has a lot of time left ahead of her. So yeah, she's gonna have to look to do something. And you're hearing, that she's gonna run to be the governor of California.
Yeah, one thing I think her staff is in denial too. They were doing a podcast yesterday, which was replayed on social media and well, at least Fox News, and they're in total denial. And they blame the media. Uh, they were pressy, according to the staff. I don't know what that means, but asking her small, minute questions. I think she got a totally free ride from the media, so that's a pile of bunk. But the other thing, she came on Rachel and she said, "We did a great job. We raised 1.4 billion." Now, if I had been her, I would not have reminded viewers that she, ran through 1 billion for, including 2.5 million to Oprah and various other stars in the millions of dollars, and still is 20 million in the hole. I wouldn't be reminding people of that.
I can't help but wonder if that's why she looks so stressed, because they have all this debt and because the news has been leaked that they wasted millions and millions of dollars on these celebrity endorsements, which just shows how vapid and honestly fake those endorsements were. If someone was going to pay me a couple $20 million for an endorsement, like, even no matter who they are, I'm going to think about that long and hard. I don't, none, and for someone, who's morally bankrupt, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. "Oh, yeah, sure, I'll show up for you and give this endorsement." So, I suspect that has a significant to do with the level of stress that we're seeing. Now, the big news out of the States this week was, of course, Donald Trump's threat to put 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico for all of their products coming into the States, unless both of these countries, Canada and Mexico, stop the flow of illegal drugs and people crossing into the United States of America. And the response from our politicians down here in Canada has varied significantly. So, I did an extensive show on this yesterday on the Rachel Parker Show. We covered this topic extensively at Brian Lilly on. He kind of gave his analysis on what the actual numbers are of people crossing and of drugs crossing. I should recommend that my viewers go look at that. But today I specifically want to focus on the response from our politicians here in Canada. Starting off with Pierre Poilievre, who came out really strongly, and I'll let you hear for yourself what he had to say. Take a listen to this clip.
The U.S. is 40% of our economy. President Trump yesterday made an unjustified threat of a 25% tariff on our already weak and shrinking economy. Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland were surprised, amazingly. Everyone else knew something like this could be coming because President Trump had been talking about it for years on the campaign trail. Yet 20 days ago, Chrystia Freeland said, "Don't worry, Canada will be fine." Apparently, neither she nor Justin Trudeau were following what the incoming president was saying. And now we must take account and we must be honest with our unprecedented weakness. After 9 years of Prime Minister Trudeau, our GDP is smaller than it was when he took off, per capita is smaller than it was when he took office. In fact, our per capita GDP has dropped more than any other G7 country since the year before COVID. We have the most indebted households. We've had the worst housing inflation. A quarter of our people are in poverty. 2 million people line up in food banks. Food prices have risen 37% faster in Canada than in the United States of America. Our economy is teetering on the brink of collapse. And now we face this renewed threat. We need a plan to put Canada first on the economy and on security.
Okay, very strong words from Pierre Poilievre. I think this was, I think he's garnered a lot of positive attention for his response here. And he essentially says we need a plan to deal with the economy and with security, with the Americans' concerns. Now, just a contrast to what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is saying yesterday when Brian Lilley is on the show, he says, I have concerns about Trudeau's response because Trudeau is saying we need to remind the Americans about their trading relationship with Canada and how important it is, how there's never been anything like it in the world before, and how we really are good allies who rely on each other. But the Americans are not taking issues with their trading relationship with Canada. They're taking issues with all these other things, the security of their border, which has been a pinnacle campaign promise of Donald Trump. And if he wants to use tariffs to get the response that he needs and wants from Canada and Mexico, he's obviously willing to do that. So Canada needs to address the border and security. They don't need to address trade. And it sounds like Justin Trudeau doesn't understand that, whereas Pierre Poilievre does and is saying we need a plan to address these threats. What's your take, Sue-Ann?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he sounded prime ministerial. And, I was reading on various threads that should send Pierre Poilievre to Washington to negotiate with Trump or Trump's colleagues because, it's funny. I went to an event just before I left to come to Florida, and Stephen Harper was talking, and he said something about, a high school student running in the country that he knew he wasn't ready for prime time. And 9 years later, it's an embarrassment to think that this prime minister of ours, who's, swinging to the vibes at Taylor Swift, would be able to negotiate anything. I mean, he allowed this to happen, and here we find ourselves in a royal mess. He allowed these people to cross the border. He allowed the loose lack of consequences, lack of laws, led us to this point. And I'm not sure that Justin Trudeau's up to the task of dealing with it, and certainly not Chrystia Freeland. Oh my God.
Well, certainly not. And as we know, Donald Trump and his team, they don't like Chrystia Freeland. He has said that before. She's the worst possible pick to be leading any negotiations with Team Trump. You can't wonder that the Canadians, it seems like Justin Trudeau kind of wants to rub salt in the wounds by sending his most disliked little lackey out there to deal with these problems that have major implications for the Canadian economy. And to your point, I think that our boss, Candace Malcolm of True North, actually put it best when she said, this is Justin Trudeau's fault. Justin Trudeau has been laxing the rules on immigration and the border since he was first elected back in 2015. And we've seen a record number of illegals flowing into Canada, including major people on terrorist watch lists. So it's a no-brainer that the United States has concerns because they're seeing some of the most just in November, one of India's most wanted terrorists was arrested and charged with a shooting related in Ontario. What is one of India's most wanted terrorists doing here in Canada? The Americans are watching this and they are noticing this and they're saying, whoa, Canada has some major security problems. We know that there's people crossing the border. About 120,000 people crossed last year from Canada into the States. They're saying this is not something that we want here. And that's why we're seeing this response. The flow of illegal immigration to the States, 9% of it is coming from Canada. The rest is coming from Mexico. So yes, it's a much smaller amount, But as Brian Lilly said yesterday, 9% of a big problem is still a problem. That's why we're seeing this response from Trump.
Yeah, and if you go, I just came back from overseas a couple of months ago, and if you go through the airport, you see nothing but in the airport, immigrants coming into Canada, and the flow, and the Trudeau government has been very exuberant about promoting the fact that they're bringing people in from Gaza, 5,000, 10,000. I've lost count, but these people are not properly vetted, and I dare say they aren't properly vetted, and then we see them on the streets of Toronto, known terrorists, streets of Toronto and Montreal creating havoc. So yeah, I think the Americans have every reason to be concerned. I'm concerned about what's populating our cities.
To your point, and I should have taken a picture of it when I was there, but I could not believe when I was in Pearson Airport last that they now have a Service Canada to deal with all the newcomers who are coming so that they can get their sin right there at Pearson Airport. I don't have that luxury. If I need to go to Service Canada, I got to plan a whole day around waiting in line. Like, the level of access that these people are given that Canadians are not even given is just ridiculous, and that they signal that openness to newcomers everywhere they can, even when it's something that Canadians are so tired with, just speaks to, a government that is deeply out of touch with the Canadian people. Want to move next on to Ontario Premier Doug Ford's response to Trump's tariff. Take a listen, then I'll share my thoughts.
What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico. We do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found them insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. I spent a lot of time in the U.S., and I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians.
Okay, so Doug Ford went on like that for a very, very long time, talking about how hurt he was. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. Like, it's a bit much. I don't personally love Doug Ford. I don't think he's doing a very good job in Ontario. That's just my personal feelings. I think a lot of conservatives in Ontario would be inclined to agree with me. But, his rhetoric there, I just don't think it really addresses the actual root of the issue. Okay, how are we going to solve it? Your feelings are hurt, wah, wah. And even to his point, I spend a lot of time in the States and I hear from Americans that they have a problem with Canadians. That's not what this is about. This is about security at the border. I don't know if Doug Ford doesn't understand that or if he simply just doesn't want to address it. But your rhetoric complaining about Trump's policy is not going to get us out of this mess.
Exactly. And, I'll go back to what I just said in the last segment before Doug Ford's comment came on. Just walk on the streets of Toronto on any average week and see the people lying down on carpets, praying in the downtown streets and blocking traffic. Come to the Jewish area of Toronto and see all these people screaming and yelling, and some of them bound to be illegals. Doug Ford I have a bone to pick with him. He hasn't handled any of this anti-Semitism. And this is what we're talking about. Dangerous illegal migrants coming into Canada and populating the streets of Toronto. He is in total denial. He hasn't dealt with it. And I'm sorry, those words are very rich for a guy who, has totally ignored the violence and the harassment and the threats that we see right in the middle of our cities.
You are absolutely correct, Sue-Ann. The irony there is quite rich. And personally, for me, Toronto is home for you. I still, in a lot of ways, regard Niagara, Ontario as my home. The number of asylum seekers that are being housed in hotels in Niagara Falls right now. When I was visiting my family for an extensive period this summer, I spent a little bit of time in Niagara Falls. It's totally different. The makeup of the city is totally different. There's very few, Canadian-born Canadians there. And just everything about the city feels totally changed. And, you're walking around and you just see migrants walking around as they're living in hotels there. It's just a baffling policy that we've allowed. And, Doug Ford is quiet on this. So he continued there in his statement after all his complaining about how unfair and how mean it was. He eventually said that Canada and Ontario would have no choice but to follow with retaliatory tariffs. And it's very interesting. Yesterday when Brian Lilly was on, he said, my colleagues in the media, they don't understand this issue. They keep asking, are we going to retaliate with our own tariffs? He's like, that isn't the point. The point is that we need to stop these tariffs. And there's a lot of real tangible ways we can do that by showing the Americans that we're taking security at the border seriously with things like, being more aware and more conscious and limiting the flow of people coming into Canada. And also, I pointed out, why don't we just add some more security at the border? Why don't we put more cameras up? Why don't we use some of all the amazing technology that's been developed in the last 10 years to have a stronger and more secure border, be very public about these changes, hire more CBSA agents, and make this all very public so the Americans are aware that we are taking this issue very seriously and we're going to crack down on people who are crossing illegally into the States. Doesn't seem that complicated to me. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I just suspect there's not a lot of political will from it on Justin Trudeau, who has basically made free immigration into Canada a pinnacle part of who he is and what this government has and what this Liberal government has done.
Yeah, and, I remember when Trump got in the last time, and I remember, Justin Trudeau standing at the airport and welcoming all these immigrants into Canada, giving them free down coats. Krista Freeland was right there handing out these goose down coats and declaring our major cities sanctuary cities. Former Mayor John Tory stood there with a bunch of councillors saying, we are open. Whoever Trump refuses, we'll take them in. We'll take them in. Come on in. And everybody heard the message. And boy, all you have to do, Rachel, is to go downtown Toronto, to the Referral and Assessment Center. I just went by there before I left. It's basically for homeless people, but it's become one for refugees. And there's a whole bunch of people just sitting out there with their suitcases with nowhere to go, thinking they're being sent from the airport, thinking they will get a nice hotel room or a nice whatever. And our shelters are completely full. It's ridiculous. And then he's welcoming on all these people from Gaza unvetted. I mean, how do you explain any of this? And you're right about Doug Ford. Instead of whining and acting hurt and saying all these ridiculous things, which showed very poor judgment, say, I am going to, I know what's happening in major cities like Toronto. I'm going to crack down on this. And I'm going to say no more refugees filling our shelters. Start with that.
You are exactly right. That would have been the better response from Ford. I want to move to Quebec Premier Francois Legault because his response might surprise you all. I actually enjoyed this quite a bit, and I was happy that we were able to get this exchange in English. Take a listen.
So you're mad at Mr. Trudeau for the lack of security at the borders?
But I'm saying it's since 2017 that we have to do something. Remember what happened at Roxham. So it goes both ways. We have to secure the border.
So basically you're saying to Donald Trump, he's right.
But I'm saying that Mr. Trump said it very often during the campaign that he would fight against illegal immigration. So that's what he's doing right now.
Okay, totally measured response there. Two things I really like about his response. One, he's basically saying it's obvious. It's obvious that this was coming. Donald Trump has signaled for years that he was going to get serious about the border crisis. Canada should have seen this coming. It was very obvious to anyone paying even the slightest bit of attention that the Americans, led by Trump, are going to be getting serious about the border and that Canada should start thinking about that. And second of all, he says, yeah, we need to secure the border. I've been saying it myself since 2017. So, maybe he has found a bit of an ally in Donald Trump because we know that he's basically said, Quebec doesn't have any more room for asylum seekers. And that's why so many of them started going over to Niagara Falls in Ontario because Quebec's full. They don't want any more. They don't have space for any more. They've told the federal government, no more, you have to move these people somewhere else. And so maybe, he's finally looking at this and saying, if the Liberals get serious about this, then I could finally see something that I want done. I could finally see some action on it.
Yeah, well, he mentioned Roxham Road, which I didn't mention in the last segment, but that was and has been a huge problem where immigrants are being bused to within meters of the border. and then they cross with their little suitcases, often designer ones, because I covered this for many, many years. And we have pictures. There are pictures of immigrants being led by border security across the border to cross illegally into Canada at Roxham Road. And Trudeau, our dear prime minister, left this unchecked. The only time it dwindled was when COVID restrictions were in place that 1 year. But he clamped down on it because of COVID restrictions. But it was a real huge issue before, and it's become a real huge issue again. And I was just gobsmacked when I would see these security people helping them with their suitcases across the border. Why don't we get some valets for them too?
It's funny that you say that the only time Trudeau clamped down on it was when it was COVID and we were at the peak of our restrictions. The only time he was willing to clamp down on illegal immigration into Canada was when his lips were, salivating at the thought that Canada was on the brink of communism. That was the only time he was willing to stop the flow of illegal people into our country. Honestly, Sue-Ann, the images that you're talking about, like, we've all seen them. It's shocking stuff. Like, it makes sort of my stomach turn when I think about the fact that the Canadian taxpayer is footing the bill for these hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers, many of them who have bogus claims, to put them up in hotels and to feed them off of the hardworking Canadian taxpayer. Each of whom is struggling in their own right now. So it is really one of the most stomach churning things. I think perhaps if we were to look at a positive of this all, bringing this issue out into the forefront, it has forced Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to take a very strong stance on it and to make it very clear that we need to put Canada first and, to really speak about the need to secure our border. And I think that's something that not even just Conservatives, but even any moderates, any people who are paying attention, anyone who cares about safety, anyone who has a young family, these are all things that are front and foremost in the mind because, as you mentioned, people living not just in Toronto, but in city centers all over the world, even in places like Red Deer, they know that their cities are no longer safe, and that's a very real concern for people.
It's because they're being bussed out of Toronto, I might add, to other parts of
They're
Ontario.
all not even
Yeah.
just Ontario here, and they're being bussed out here to Alberta as well.
Yeah, yeah. And, the images of Krista Freeland and Justin Trudeau giving out those coats at the airport, it was just mine. I still can remember them, and I'm thinking, "Oh god, I can't afford a nice, expensive goose down coat like that." But, they only have themselves to blame, as we've said.
So the other response I want to take a look at is, of course, from my own premier, Danielle Smith. She was asked on CBC News, again, she was asked if Canada should retaliate. And I think she did a pretty good job at addressing that comment and saying, this is actually what Canada should be focusing on. Take a listen.
Well, look, let's stop the leaky border first. Let's stop the illegal migration first. Let's stop the fentanyl first. Let's meet our NATO commitment first, and let's see where we get with the Americans. I think that the U.S. has legitimate issues that they have raised with us, and we've got to address those legitimate issues. I don't think that we can say yeah, but. Because quite frankly, the American economy is the strongest in the world. They can produce a lot of what they need to consume. We are very reliant on them, and they are in the position of being able to dictate terms. And so I suppose we could punish ourselves with tariffs, but I would say, why don't we take the approach of trying to figure out how to solve the things that are the trade irritants to them? That would be my first step.
Totally common sense. Solve the trade irritants that the Americans have with us. That's the solution.
Yeah, I saw a lot of whining and, screaming basically from the liberal left on social media and elsewhere. But all you have to do, Rachel, is take a look at the stock market in the States is booming. Our Canadian dollar is in the toilet. And we have so many economic issues here. Instead of whining, do something to improve it. Because the American dollar is just going to continue to get stronger if we don't address this kind of stuff. Right now, it's down below 70 cents. It's just, I feel the pinch down here, and I'm not whining because it's a first world problem, but you do feel the difference when you have to exchange a dollar for 142.
So I didn't get to his response, but and for your comment on the dollar, I mean, I love traveling in the States, but it's like so unaffordable right now. It's funny. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, because we lived so close, we would frequently cross over to get gas and to get groceries because it was cheaper, and then we would drive home. Even driving that distance, coming home, it was cheaper to get our gas and groceries in the States than it was in Canada. Now it's the opposite. We have an outlet mall in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Now all the Americans are coming over to shop at our outlet mall because our dollar's so worthless and their money just takes them so far here. And I definitely feel that pinch when I'm traveling in the States. There's nothing worse than, you go to buy a coffee and you're like, huh, by the time I add in the credit card transaction fee, I think I might have just spent about $6 on this thing. Kind of wondering if it was really worth it after all. So we didn't get to David Eby's response, but his was similar, lots of whining and complaining and not talking about the actual solutions. So let's just quickly kind of grade the responses here. I think, I think Danielle Smith was probably the strongest. I think she really hit the nail on the head on all the things that Canada needs to do. I appreciated Francois Legault, just sort of the measured. He seemed almost quite relaxed about the whole thing. He was like, it's so obvious that this was coming. They've been talking about it for years. Again, Pierre Poilievre is really strong. One of the positives about this whole thing is it's brought the issue to the forefront, and we could kind of get a sense as to where the Conservative leader and the likely next Prime Minister of Canada stands on these issues. And then Justin Trudeau, like the issue just seems to have gone right over his head. He has absolutely no idea what he's doing. Doug Ford whining, Eby whining. Which response do you think was the strongest, Sue-Ann?
I would say Daniel Smith, followed by, Pierre Poilievre was articulate as usual, but Daniel Smith actually talked about the implications on the economy and how this can affect the economy. And people are missing all of that. And about the fact that all you have to do is respect their wishes, and, our economy hopefully will improve. Francis Legault, also touched on Roxham Road, which has been a real sore point in Canada. That's where they've entered, and people seem to forget that. So I found both of them very, very pointed in their responses, and good for them for addressing the issues.
Yeah, and I would just add, Pierre Poilievre did touch on the fact that this would just shutter the Canadian economy because of recession. We just had to clip the responses due to time. So for the viewers, definitely recommend go take a full look at Pierre Poilievre's press conference and how he addressed this if you are curious. And then, Sue-Ann, just the last thing I'm wondering here is, where do you think this is going to go? Is there a chance that Canada is going to be able to appease the Americans and get out from under these tariffs? Or are we going to just expect our economy to be absolutely crushed starting on January 20th?
Well, one would hope not. I don't think it's going to be 25%. I think that, Trump is the seasoned negotiator, and, the art of the deal. So you start high and so hopefully scale back. But I don't hold much faith in Krista Freeland, or we didn't mention Melanie Joly because she's been talking about it as well. The thought of those two.
She never says, honestly, anything of much value. Sorry to interrupt. I watch her videos and I'm like, there's no context, there's no substance here.
No, but the thought of her going to Washington makes my, the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I just don't think we have people on the bench, seasoned people on the bench to negotiate. So God knows where this is going to go. And people better get with the program, the politicians, Doug Ford, or our economy we're going to go into a deep, deep recession.
Well, that's why I started off by saying, everyone batten down the hatches. You guys are going to want to save your money. I have a feeling things might be pretty rough over the next coming weeks. I don't know if Justin Trudeau is really up for the job. Nothing he's indicated has signaled to me that he understands really even what the complaints are, or that he is willing to do what is necessary to address those complaints. So I have a feeling of unease there. I do agree with you. It's possible that those tariffs will end up being lower. Maybe there'll be a carve out for Alberta Energy. Things all remain to be seen. So for you, the audience, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'm wondering, A, whose response did you think was the strongest? And B, where is this all going to go? What's your take? Do you think we're actually going to see these 25% tariffs beginning on January 20th? Or do you think that somehow, something, an act of God, like save Donald Trump's life in the campaign, will save Canada? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Rachel and the Republic. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks, Sue-Ann, and God bless.